Great. So we're just doing a short little study today. This is something that I've been thinking about for the last lot of weeks, and it's in regard to um, following Jesus. As it says there, what happens when we follow Jesus? And it's a study in the statement where Jesus says, "Follow me." And the picture up there in the corner is taken from the Jesus film, which has been greatly used by God around the world. It's been translated in well over 3,000 different languages for the purposes of sharing the gospel, and it's based entirely on the Gospel of Luke. But anyway, so you can just see Jesus sort of reaching out his hand there and asking people to come to him. And so what we're going to do today is we'll be looking at this phrase of what happens when we follow Jesus, and looking at this particular phrase. But before I sort of get the PowerPoint sort of rolling, I'm just going to share out another screen here, which is uh, what's called eSword. And as you can see on the screen here, this is a free Bible program that you can download from the internet at eSword, e-sword.net. And it's a very handy program for Bible study. There's a lot of free resources that come with it. There are other resources that you can also purchase um, uh, uh, to do Bible study. So you can get dictionaries, commentaries, different versions of the Bible in different languages, and all kinds of stuff. So anyway, we have up here the King James version. This is Matthew 1:1. So you can look at it in the Greek if you wish, and so that's Matthew in Greek. And you can also see what this particular thing looks like in Hebrew as well. So anyway, so that looks, so I don't think any of us can actually get reading that properly. So, but anyway, so we'll get back to the King James. I just have the free versions on here. I do have another Bible program where I have the New King James on it, which is called Word Search, which has been bought out by another crowd called Logos. But to be honest, I don't really like the new Logos software. It's a bit of a hard to understand, and that might be hard for you all to understand. For me, not understanding something about a computer, but anyway. So, but this program, I'm just going to show you just how to find a, a phrase. So anyway, just clicked on a pair of binoculars there, and what I'm going to look for here is the term "follow me." Okay. And that particular phrase, and what I want to do is not just search for all the words, but I want to search for the exact phrase. And I don't want to just look in the whole Bible, but I want to look in the Gospels and Acts. So that's where I'm going to limit my search, because I want to find out where Jesus says, "Follow me" to people. So I click on the little binoculars here, and that will give me then a list of all the different places in the uh, Gospels and in Acts, if it occurs in Acts, where this phrase is found. So we can see there in Matthew 4:19, it says, "And he saith unto them, Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Matthew 8:22, but Jesus said unto him, "Follow me, let the dead bury their own dead," and so on. So it found that phrase exactly as we typed it. And so if I go down toward the bottom of this thing, it will then tell me, well, in Matthew, there was 5 verses found. In Mark, there were 3 verses found. Luke, 4 verses. John, 5 verses. But there was 6 matches because one of the verses actually has the phrase twice. And Acts, there was a found 1 verse. But as you can see up there in Acts 12:2, this doesn't have anything to do with Jesus, because it says the angel said unto him, gird thyself and bind on thy sandals. And he did so, and he said unto him, cast thy garment around thee and follow me. Now this is the angel speaking to Peter and telling him to follow him. So that's not a phrase that we're going to, or a verse that we're going to look at, but obviously it was picked up by the search mechanism. So anyway, I used a program like this in order to find these verses, and so it just makes an interesting then sort of Bible study. So say okay to that, and if I had done this search, let me just go back to my search thing here. Let's say I wanted to go and look at that Matthew 4:19, which is the first verse. If I just clicked on it and then said okay, then you can see here that puts my first window in the context here of when Jesus calls his first disciples. So anyway, so let me get back to the PowerPoint here. So there we go, back to the PowerPoint. So so the question is well, where is this statement found? So I just wanted, so I just showed you that little bit there in terms of how it was found, but we'll just go through the verses here about where it's found. And so I'm going to go through all these incidences, but you'll see some commonality. You'll see some of the same stories that are mentioned, but it's just to give you the feel of where this statement is found, and then we'll sort of break down, well, why is this so important? What does it mean to me? So in Matthew 4:19, it says, and then he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Matthew 8:22, but Jesus said to him, follow me, and let the dead bury their own dead. Matthew 9:9 says that Jesus passed on from there. He saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax office and said to him, follow me. So he rose and followed him. Matthew 16:24, and then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. There's one more here in Matthew where Jesus says to him, if you want to be perfect, go sell what you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come follow me. So so in Matthew, there's 5 situations that Jesus uses this phrase about calling people to follow him. Now, Jesus, in terms of his own disciples, all of them, he did call all of them to follow him, but we're specifically looking at this phraseology that Jesus uses. But it'll be interesting to sort of then understand the historical context about why following somebody was quite significant, because as you look at these different verses, like the first one there, Matthew 4:19, where it says, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." The Peter and Andrew, and then subsequently James and John, who were called at this particular time, they dropped everything and went and followed Jesus. And and I always find that extraordinary that men who were involved in their trade and livelihood and everything that was going on around them just dropped everything and went after Jesus. So I find that interesting. As well, what made them do that? Why were they so taken and just did it? As opposed to saying, well, let me go and sort my stuff out. Matthew 9:9 is the same thing with Matthew. Matthew just, dropped his money box basically, and just, it says, and rose and followed them. So he was sitting in his tax office. He had sort of responsibilities, perhaps, and all sorts of things that were under his responsibility. So, but yet he rose and followed them, just dropped everything. So what was that about? And then there's these other things where Jesus was talking to different people about following him and the cost and so on. Now, in Mark, there's less verses. Mark 1:17 says, and Jesus said to them, follow me, and I'll make you become fishers of men. So that was that same situation of Peter, Andrew, and James, and John. And Mark 2:14, as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, and this is Matthew's other name, sitting at the tax office, and he said to him, follow me, and he rose and followed him. Mark 8:34, when he had called the people to himself with his disciples also, he said to them, whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. And the last one there in Mark is, and when Jesus, looking at him, loved him and said to him, one thing you lack, go your way, sell whatever you have, give to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven, and come, take up the cross and follow me. And this was the statement that was given to the rich young ruler. So, so you can see here that there is sort of one situation that's missing compared to Matthew, and that was that particular disciple, that man that had said that he wanted to go and bury his father first. So, and then in Luke, there's again a similar sort of selection of verses and scenarios. After these things, he went out, saw a tax collector named Matthew. Again, this is Levi, that's Matthew, sitting at the tax office, and he said to him, follow me. And Luke 9:23, and then he said to them all, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. So I've seen that in all three of the Gospels so far. Luke 9:59. It says, and then he said to another, follow me. But he said, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. So that was in that discussion with that man there that was mentioned in Matthew 8. And then there's Luke 18:22. So when Jesus heard these things, he said, you still lack one thing. Sell all that you have and distribute to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me. So this was the story about the rich young ruler again. So this one is mentioned in all three of the Gospels. So it's obviously has a great bit of importance attached to it. Now, when you come to the Gospel of John, the statement is found, but it is not in any of the same situations that are found in the Synoptic Gospels, which is Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Because John is covering material that wasn't covered in the first three Gospels. John was written much, much later, and John's had a couple of different tasks on his hand, and that was to deal with parts of Christ's life that were not covered in the other Gospels, and also to bring about the teaching and understanding that Jesus Christ indeed is God. So that was his John's main emphasis, whereas Matthew's main emphasis was looking at Jesus as the Messiah, the King, and Mark was looking at Jesus as the servant that came not to be served but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. And Luke was then looking at the humanity of Christ, that Christ was indeed God in the flesh. So anyway, here in John, in chapter 1, this is the call of Philip. And he says, the following day, Jesus wanted to go to Galilee, and he found Philip and said to him, follow me. And then John 10:27 says, my sheep hear my voice, I know them, and they follow me. So this is obviously a teaching here, as opposed to speaking to someone directly. And if anyone serves me, let him follow me where I am. There my servant will be also. And if anyone serves me, him my Father will honor. And John 13:36, Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? And Jesus answered him, where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you shall follow me afterward. So, and then in John 21:19, it says this, he spoke signifying by what death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, follow me. So, and then the last verse there, which is in the same context, same story, Jesus said to him, if I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? You follow me. So we'll actually be looking at those two verses together at some stage. So that's where in the Gospels that all this phrase about following Jesus is found. So, but what I want to do now is I want to ask this question: well, why was being asked to follow someone a big deal back then? Because I think it's important to understand the cultural significance of that phrase, because that was a common phrase. For somebody of position or somebody of good reputation, or at least some kind of authority, to ask somebody to follow them was a big thing. So, and what did that mean? What did that look like? Because in our day and age, if we have somebody say, well, come and follow me, it's almost like saying, going out and playing a kid's game, like, play follow the leader, or something like that, or Simon Says, or we would nearly look at it as like or follow me and I'll take you where you need to go. I remember when I first came to Europe back in 1982. A man, I followed a guard who took me to the right part of the airport. I followed him. He indicated to me, follow me and I will take you to the right place. Well, I followed him, So following people today, has a different kind of connotation than it did back then. So, but people that were that followed rabbis were called disciples. So the actual word disciple was not strictly reserved for the 12, that followed Jesus. There was loads of disciples back in Bible times. Any rabbi that had any kind of notoriety or reputation and wanted people to follow them as a man of authority, they called various people, and those particular people were called disciples. And disciples was just mainly a follower, that person who's going to take on board their teaching, to be where they were, and to be committed to them. So a disciple obviously has a little more oomph to it than saying that this person's a student or a learner. It certainly includes that, but it includes also adaptation of lifestyle and the principles and everything that the rabbi would be then promoting. Rabbis chose followers very carefully, and reputation was important. Now, when I say reputation there, it's not only the reputation of the rabbi, but it's also, I think, the reputation of the follower, because, the rabbi wanted to make sure that he had people following him that wouldn't give him a bad name. He would want followers that would give him a good name. Because the rabbis, especially those of the Pharisees, were people that were very much caught up in presentation. Now, not all of them were like that. You take people like Nicodemus, Joseph of Arimathea, these people that are mentioned in the Gospel of John, who were rabbis, people that were part of the Sanhedrin, the ruling body of the Jews, and these men were godly men. And so they weren't necessarily like some of the others who were just kind of into it for themselves. These men really had a desire for God. So, not everybody was the same, and not everybody chose, for different sorts of reasons. But the rabbis did choose very, very carefully. And Jesus, in a sense, was no different in terms of how he chose, but the basis of his choosing was, I would say, different than how a standard issue rabbi would choose. Um, Now, rabbis could have chosen for selfish reasons. They could have chosen for self-promotion. It's like, look at me, I'm choosing these particular men to follow me because I have something to say. I have something to teach. I have something to promote. And now it could have been a good thing. They could have, gotten people around them in order to teach them the things of God. There were certainly rabbis that would have done that, but there would have been other rabbis too that would have been more, look at me, follow me. I'm this kind of person because I'm important and I have reputation and I have authority. So to me, it would be more of a self-promotion exercise. And it was a great privilege and an honor to be asked by a rabbi to be a follower. This was a big, big thing. So for a rabbi, I have to realize too that there is different levels of teachers back in those days. There was what was called a rab, who was a sort of a lower level teacher. A rabbi was a higher end teacher and master of his understanding and trade in the things of the scriptures and the law. And then there was a Rabboni, which Jesus was referred to as sometimes as really being the top end in terms of teachers. So there was the rabbi, and Rabboni in terms of levels of teachers. So, but to be asked by one of these men was of great privilege and of extraordinary honor to do this. And so, so for Jesus, then, asking people of questionable reputation, was a bit sort of rare, but his motivation was grace and love leading to everlasting change. So Jesus, when he asked people, was not too concerned really about his own reputation. Jesus, being God, could see beyond man's eyes and man's ideas and that kind of thing. So, because the 12 that were called by Jesus were men that came from some interesting sorts of collections of backgrounds. That's why the calling of Matthew was as a tax collector was, no rabbi in their right mind back then would have asked a tax collector to be a follower. That just wouldn't have happened. Asking fishermen, yes, that would have been sort of within the scope, but they would have been sort of rough and ready characters. Maybe not. Asking Simon the Zealot, who was and Judas Iscariot, those two people that were both zealots in their own right. That would have been a dodgy prospect as well. So there's a lot of men, in the discipleship or the disciple ranks of Jesus that would have been of questionable reputation. But again, Jesus is not looking as man sees. He looks on the heart and looks at his own motivation, which was grace and love, because he knew that he could change them. But Jesus had a great reputation. And so for these men then to be asked by Jesus, because Jesus was known as that Rabboni, that master teacher, was of a great privilege and a great honor. And so that's why they would have dropped everything. So the disciple would have dropped everything and dedicated his whole life and practice to following and obeying the rabbi. The disciple ate, slept, and breathed everything that had to do with the rabbi and his teaching. So, and when I was looking at these things and kind of doing a bit of study about this, I thought this was important to really then understand why the particular disciples that Jesus was speaking to and inviting. That's why everything just got dropped immediately, was because Jesus had this draw, Jesus had this reputation, And when a man of that caliber asked you to do something, then everything else went. It didn't matter. You dropped everything. You dedicated your whole life and your practice to following and obeying Jesus. So as you then, look at the Gospels, the disciples, they ate, they slept, they breathed, they did everything with Jesus. And a disciple had complete access to the rabbi. So they could ask anything of the rabbi, because the rabbi was there to be asked and to teach. And it required unwavering commitment to submit to the rabbi's authority. So, and that's one thing that the disciples of Jesus did, is that they were fully committed to the authority of Jesus. And that is what's demonstrated quite readily in the Gospel of Matthew in particular, is the authority of Jesus Christ. So now, what does following Jesus then address? So if we look at this, I think it addresses some different things. And one is the periods of life that we have. Now, when I'm talking about periods of life, I'm talking about past, talking about present, talking about future. So if we look at the past, and particularly about the man here in Matthew 8:22 and Luke 9:59, where he says to the man, follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. But what the man does or says, in Luke there, it's also in Matthew as well, but is he says, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. Now, I don't know if the father had died, but it was probably more about, what my priority is to go, go back and deal with these things. So really, a disciple to say, well, let me first do this, and say that to a rabbi really was a big slap in the face, because a rabbi didn't just do this willy-nilly, and the response of a would-be disciple should be, right, whatever you say, I'll do. So the disciple had misplaced priorities, and he had a lack of really understanding then of what it was to be a follower of Jesus. But if you think about, those sorts of things, the dead burying their own dead, it's like, look, there are things that have happened in our past, but what we need is to see the reality of it. So that's what Jesus helped him to see, was the reality of his past, and that he could not change his past. So let the people of the past just deal with the things of the past. And because Jesus is interested in getting us to start moving forward. So often what happens is that we get stuck in our pasts. We hear the voices of what people have told us about ourselves, and we're told, well, you have certain sorts of responsibilities. You have to stay back here and deal with those things. But Jesus, I think, here helps him to see the reality of this thing, because he says to him in the Gospel of Luke, he says, you follow me and preach the gospel. So because that's where the priorities lay. That's what it's all about. Because you could end up getting stuck in the past of things. Well, oh, but I have to do this, I have to do that. And it's all because of what people in the past have told me. So that are my responsibilities. So now we have to weigh those things up. We do have to look at those things. But when we look at those things with Jesus then in the middle of that then helps us. It addresses our present. Jesus sees Matthew's present and changes his life forever. So Matthew 9:9, Mark 2:14, and Luke 5:27, This is all the call of Matthew, or Levi, as he's called in the other Gospels there. And but Matthew is in a present job, and really that particular present that he's in is not going too far. You know, it's taxing people. It's being in other people's pockets, quite literally. And so, but but it's interesting when you look at those verses. You know, the thing that Jesus does here is he doesn't negotiate with Matthew. You know, he sees Matthew. In fact, what it says there in Matthew 9:9 says, when Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting in the tax office. Mark, it says, as he passed by, he saw Levi the son of Alphaeus sitting in the tax office. And then Luke there, it says, and he went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting in the tax office. So, you know, this is one of the situations where Jesus sees things. You know, he sees into our life. He sees where we are. He sees our present predicament, as it were. And the thing that Jesus then does as he sees this, and he sees all of us, he sees all of our presence in terms of, you know, where we are, and but he doesn't negotiate with us. He saw Matthew where he was, and he says two words: "Follow me." And what does he do? He arose and follows him. So, you know, that, you know, Matthew doesn't do what the other guy does, you know, which is like, oh, well, I got to go and sort my things out. I got to go and sell my business, get it shifted, or pass it on as a ongoing concern, or whatever, you know, going through all these things. You know, when Jesus speaks into our present, we have to follow him immediately. Because that's what's required, and sometimes that's hard to do. You know, we think that we need to go and sort things out, but when Jesus comes into our present, you know, he comes to exercise authority. He comes to say, I know better than you do, because where you are is not where you want to be or you should be, but I can make you something that is far better than ever you would ever think. So Matthew takes this on board and realizes, you know, here's Jesus, who's a rabbi of great reputation, and he wants me. Gosh, all I am is a publican. All I am is a tax collector. I'm a man of no reputation. Everybody else hates me. I'm a traitor. All these sorts of things, and that Jesus goes straight into the middle of that and says, "I want you. Follow me now." You know, so that's what he does. It also addresses our future. So, and these would be the early things in the Gospel of Matthew. It says the would-be disciples are given a future that is beyond their expectations. So in Matthew 4:19, Mark 1:17, and then just in looking at Luke 5:1 through 11. Now Jesus doesn't say "follow me" in that particular story, but that's the same story. Just the phrase isn't there. That's why we didn't pick up on it. But it does inform us in terms of what's happening, because this is where Jesus teaches the people from Peter's boat. And then Jesus, after that, says to Peter and all the disciples, knowing that they had not caught any fish that night, he says, launch out into the deep water and let your nets down for a catch. And so this is where Peter says, Master, we have toiled all night and have caught nothing, but at your word I will let down the net. And in the King James Bible, the New King James Bible talks about a singular net. In the other translations, like the ESV, the NIV, New American Standard, those sorts of things, it says that Peter says, "At your word, I'll let down the nets." plural. So now the Greek manuscript that they use, it is plural. I checked it out. But going to the one where he says, "I'll let down the net," he's basically saying to Jesus, "Look, I'm not really quite sure about what you're saying to me here, but just in respect to you, I'll go and let down a net." Okay, so he does that, and then his net starts to break, gets more boats to come over, and there's so many fish that all the boats start to sink. So, and then Peter says, "Depart from me, for I'm a sinful man, O Lord." And then Jesus says to him, "Do not be afraid, for from now on you'll be catching men." And but what Jesus is doing here is that he is taking where people are in their sort of stuck sort of situation, and Peter would have been looking at himself as a man that as inadequate, but Jesus is saying, "Look, what I can do for you if you follow me is I can change your future. From now on, you're going to be catching men." And what he does here is Jesus' future for them is understood in the light of their present, because he's talking about catching men. And so he says, "Look, as you all are fishermen, that you go and you fish and do that kind of thing. Well, guess what? You're going to be doing something you're going to be catching things that are a lot bigger and a lot better, a lot more eternal significance than catching a fish. You're going to be catching men for the kingdom of God." So following Jesus here really does, address these periods of life, of our past, our present, and our future. But what else does following Jesus address? Well, here's just one more point here about the future. It says the disciples needed to buy into Jesus' authority. They needed to know the guide before the guidance. Because they probably didn't understand, well, why? Here's this rabbi, here's this man that teaches the Bible, and yet he knows so much about fishing and a lot more than we do, obviously. So, because Jesus told them to go and let their nets down into deep water, which is, and during the day, you didn't. That's not how you fished. You fished at night, and fish came to the surface. That's that was so for Jesus to say that to seasoned fishermen just sounded a bit daft, but Jesus obviously knew things they didn't know. So but what they did is they bought into this, and they said, well, Jesus knows. Jesus understands and has authority in these scenarios, and so that's why they just left everything. And as it says in the Bible, that they James and John left their father Zebedee sitting in the boat. So but they needed to know the guide before they were getting any guidance. It's like, know that Jesus is the king, know Jesus is the one that has authority, follow him, and then he'll show you the way. So in terms of the other things that is happening, well, there's the priorities of life, as I would call them. And there's this idea of commitment. And so if we look at the total denial of self, which is in Matthew 16:24, Mark 8:34, and Luke 9:23, that's where Jesus, talks about, you must deny yourself and follow me. So what I have here is it requires a release of rights on material possessions, on occupation, and relationships, because Jesus talks about this quite extensively in the Gospels in terms of men making excuses. Because if you remember that discussion, there was a man who says, I've bought land here, I must go see it, so have me excused. I've bought 5 yoke of oxen, which talks about occupation. Please have me excused. I need to go and test them. I've married a wife, and therefore I cannot come, which is all in light of this great wedding feast. So there's all these excuses that were given. But Jesus then goes on, talks about discipleship, and he says, look, unless you hate father and mother, wife and children, and so on, brother and sister, and so on, more than me, you cannot be my disciple. So he talks about relationships, he talks about occupation, he talks about material possessions. And so we need to give up our rights to those things. And that's what following Jesus involves, is a total commitment. People understood that back then, because when a rabbi called people to be with himself in terms of being disciples, they dropped everything and they were committed to them. And I also have this thing called abandonment here, which really has to do with the rich young ruler, because he needed to recognize his current and past holds. So that was in Matthew 19:21, Mark 10:21, and Luke 18:22. And these things, could be in the form of religious and material understandings, so because the thing that was holding the rich young ruler back was, well, Jesus, I've done all the commandments, so what is it that I still have a problem with here? Because he asked Jesus, he says, good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? The key word there they used there is, what do I have to do in a religious context to secure this? And then we also know later on that, he wasn't really quite prepared to give up everything and follow Jesus. So he had material possessions. So he had a religious foothold and a materialism sort of foothold. So those were things that he was not prepared to abandon. So we've talked about the periods of life and also the priorities of life. Now, the statements from John deal with a few other different sorts of things here, just to finish up. So those called by Christ hear his voice, in regard to the call of Philip, and then there in John 10:27, where it says there, my sheep hear my voice, I know them, and they follow me. So following Jesus requires hearing his voice. Following involves serving, because in the 12:26 there, it says, if anyone serves me, let him follow me, and where I am, there my servant will be also, and if anyone serves me, him my Father will honor. So part of following Jesus is not just being at meetings, or being in the classroom. It requires then serving. Serving involves trust, because in 13:36, Peter says to him, Lord, where are you going? And Jesus said to him, where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you shall follow me afterward. So what that speaks to me is that you hang in there. You trust me with these things, because there are certain times where you will not be able to follow me physically and perhaps practically. But hang in there, because you'll get to that point where you will be able to follow me, because the master always knows better. And then the last situation here is in John 21, where it says, when he's talking to Peter and John, and John is following after Jesus, and Jesus, tells Peter, look, you're going to be led to a place where you don't want to go and die a death, and so on. And and in that last verse there, Jesus says to him, if I will that he remain, meaning John, till I come, well, what is that to you? You follow me. So it's so following is an individual matter, not someone else's concern. So if Jesus is calling you to follow him, then that is his call on you. Don't worry about what Jesus' call is on somebody else, and how Jesus deals with them. So following is that individual type of matter. So, um, but I've found that looking at these things and studying these things has been quite revealing in terms of what it means to follow Jesus, and but following Jesus is comprehensive because it does help me then in every area of life and areas of thought and areas of practice, areas of what I say and so on. And one thing I've been learning these past weeks and such is that Jesus needs to be in the middle of absolutely everything. He wants us to. We have full access to Him. As a learner had full access to the rabbi, we have full access to the Lord Jesus Christ, and we can talk to Him about anything. We can ask Him any question. We eat, we sleep, we breathe, everything about Him, because He needs to be in the middle of everything that we do, because His grace and His love will then change us in an everlasting way.